Radha Govardhana ki jai, Gaur Premanandi Hari Hari Bol. Canto 1, Chapter 19, Text 25. Tatra bhavat bhagavan vyasa putro yadrichya gam atmano napeksha alakshalingo nijalabhatushta vitas chabalar avaduta desha. Tatra, there, abhavat, appeared, Bhagavan, powerful, Vyasaputra, son of Vyasadeva, Yadrichaya, as one desires, Gam, the earth, Atamana, while travelling, Anapeksha, disinterested, alaksha, unmanifested, linga, symptoms, nijalabha, self-realized, tushta, satisfied, grita, surrounded, cha, and balai, by children, avaduta, neglected by others, Vesha, dress. Translation. At that moment there appeared the powerful son of Vyasadeva, who travelled over the earth disinterested and satisfied with himself. He did not manifest any symptoms of belonging to any social order or status of life. He was surrounded with women and children, and he dressed as if others had neglected him. Translation, please repeat. At that moment, there appeared the powerful son of Vyasadeva, who travelled over the earth, disinterested and satisfied with himself. He did not manifest any symptoms of belonging to any social order or status of life. He was surrounded with women and children, and he dressed as if others had neglected him. Purport. The word Bhagavan is sometimes used in relation with some of the great devotees of the Lord, like Sukadeva Goswami. Such liberated souls are disinterested in the affairs of this material world because they are self-satisfied by the great achievements of devotional service. As explained before, Sukadeva Goswami never accepted any formal spiritual master, nor did he undergo any formal reformatory performances. His father Vyasadeva was his natural spiritual master because Sukadeva Goswami heard Srimad Bhagavatam from him. After this he became completely self-satisfied. Thus he was not dependent on any formal process. The formal processes are necessary for those who are expected to reach the stage of complete liberation, but Sri Sukadeva Goswami was already in that status by the grace of his father. As a young boy, he was expected to be properly dressed, but he went about naked and was uninterested in social customs. He was neglected by the general populace, and inquisitive boys and women surrounded him as if he were a madman. He thus appears on the scene while travelling on the earth of his own accord. It appears that upon the inquiry of Maharaj Parikshit, the great sages were not unanimous in their decision as to what was to be done. For spiritual salvation, there were many prescriptions according to the different modes of different persons, but the ultimate aim of life is to attain the highest perfectional state of devotional service to the Lord. As doctors differ, so also sages differ in their different prescriptions. While such things were going on, the great and powerful son of Vyasadeva appeared on the scene. So Sukadeva Goswami, the appearance of Sukadeva Goswami, he's come now to the place where he was going to speak Srimad Bhagavatam to Maharaj Parikshit, Sukratal, a very holy place in India. One can still go to this place and see where all the great sages were assembled, and there Maharaj Parikshit, the emperor of the world, had been cursed to die from a snake bite. He had 7 days and he'd gone there fasting and just prepared to hear from the great authorities. Now Prabhupada mentions here that it appears that the great sages were not unanimous in their decision as what was to be done. Now in the previous verse, Maharaj Parikshit was addressing the sages. I ask you about my immediate duty. Please, after proper deliberation, tell me of the unalloyed duty of everyone in all circumstances, specifically of those who were just about to die. So of course this was of special significance to Maharaj Parikshit. He was cursed to die by the snake bite. But what is the duty of everyone? And this was these two questions proper. These are the two questions that were asked by Maharaj Parikshit to the sages. So everyone has their specific duties in life. According to the Varna and Ashram, this is called Svadharma. What is your occupation? What are your duties? And of course, these vary from person to person, and they pertain to things of this world, and they may change. They may change. And one goes from one occupation to another. In Western countries, of course, in the system of Varna Ashram, generally they stayed in their Varnas and Ashram. Of course, the Ashrams, they can change their Ashrams. Varnas sometimes also can be changed. So the Svadharmas can change, but along with the Svadharma, and Prabhupada explains in Bhagavad Gita in one purport, he said, on the path of progressive life, there are 2 tracks, just like the train has 2 tracks. One track and one track, and it runs on the wheels like that. One is the Svadharma, what are occupational, specific, and the other is Sanatana Dharma. Sanatana Dharma, what is our eternal occupation, what is our eternal duties. So what is the duty of everyone in all circumstances? So this Parikshit asked, what is the duty of everyone? Sanatana Dharma, eternal activities. Activities that will benefit us eternally. This is Sanatana Dharma, and especially the path of devotional service is eternal benefit to the soul. So this is not changing; it is always with us. So this is called eternal Dharma, Sanatana Dharma. And Prabhupada, of course, mentions here now, more important, especially for Maharaj Parikshit, was that, and he was about to die. So what should I specifically those? What is the duty of everyone, specifically of those who are just about to die? Prabhupada actually mentions that the whole of Srimad Bhagavatam, beginning from the 2nd canto right up to the 12th canto, deals with these 2 questions. And the conclusion arrived at thereof is that devotional service of Lord Sri Krishna, as it confirmed by the Lord himself in the last phases of Bhagavad Gita, is the last word in relation to everyone's permanent duty in life. If you read the Bhagavad Gita, especially 18th chapter, Manmana Bhavaman Bhakto Madhyaji, as we go through the 18th chapter towards the end, as Prabhupada points out here, the last phases of the Bhagavad Gita, the last instructions of Krishna, where he says that the devotional, in the 12th chapter actually, starting from there and going right through, and especially at the end, where even Arjuna asks, what about the different levels? What about Brahman? Which is higher, the Brahman? Which is more perfect, the Brahman or the Bhakti? And Krishna says both are on the level of perfect, but the more perfect is the devotional service. So at the end of Bhagavad Gita, Krishna reiterates this, and Prabhupada says this is confirmed by Krishna in Bhagavad Gita, and the Bhagavatam also deals with this right up to the position of devotional service as the ultimate position of Sanatana Dharma. Now, as mentioned, that the sages were answering and they were not unanimous. Now, Parikshit Maharaj was concerned that the sages were satisfied with his course of action, especially at the time of death. The path he chose. He was a bit concerned about it. He didn't want it to be a controversy. After he left, he was the emperor of the world, and he wanted their approval. He wanted their approval. He wanted their blessings. He wanted their approval, and he sought that. And so, and Prabhupada points out that there were different instructions or statements put forward by the sages, and this is why Prabhupada says that it appears that they were not unanimous as to their decision as what was to be done. And he says here, for spiritual salvation there are sometimes many prescriptions according to the different modes of different persons. So in the Vedas and the path the karma kanda, the jnana kanda, all different instructions given according to the person, what is going to be best for them, just like the example was given here of the doctor, according to your degree of your position, what your illness, the seriousness of the situation, what you're able to take, also what you're able to take. The doctors will prescribe, sometimes they adjust also when they give, so sometimes you go back, I took the medicine but it's having an adverse effect, so the doctors will adjust it. So this is going on. So prescriptions are given, so the sages are like that, they're prescribing certain things. They were not unanimous, but Parikshit Maharaj was concerned that it be settled, that everyone was all right with his decision to follow in a certain way. So now we have the entrance of Sukadeva Goswami, and a very amazing entrance too, because he was just coming in. Here it is mentioned, he was like Avaduta, come in, walking in naked, and surrounded, there were children and women who were like thinking he was just a madman, and they were making jokes about him and so on and so forth. It was also mentioned later on that when they came there, they were following him, and he just like was oblivious. And but when they came there, they saw all this big assembly and the emperor there. And when Sukadeva Goswami was seated and given utmost respect, then they all just faded off into the background. So this was Sukadeva Goswami. So a very amazing personality, and there was no astonishment from any of the sages or Maharaj Parikshit, or how he came in, and just here is mentioned that Vaishya, he had some sort of but Prabhupada actually says he was walking naked. He came like that, and no one, that everyone knew his position. He was already very famous, Sukadeva Goswami, already very, very famous personality. And of course, that the sages knew him. Now, interestingly, now it is mentioned the very powerful son of Vyasadeva, who travelled over the earth, disinterested, satisfied within himself. He was satisfied with the achievements of devotional service. Now, of course, in the material world, one works very hard to attain certain achievements in life, whether it's money, whether it's fame, whether it's prestige, whether it's a combination of all these things, and one works very, very hard. But of course those things are sometimes gained and sometimes not gained. Sometimes you can work we see people work very hard and they still don't get money. They work their whole lives. And I've said this before, I remember Grihastha, a godbrother of mine, came to me many years ago and said, Maharaj, I've been married for 30 years and I've got less money now than when I started. I'm in more debt than before. So, and I've worked hard. So certainly we see in the material world like that, people work hard, or they just can't. It's a matter of the karma and all sorts of factors are there. So someone can work hard, or someone doesn't work and gets a lot of money, or gets fame, or whatever it is. Sometimes you achieve it, sometimes you make money, sometimes you lose it. So these things are coming and going, very temporary, but the spiritual achievements are permanent. Spiritual achievement. Normally when one comes to the material world, one is conditioned, and if one is interested in making, advancing in a progressive spiritual way, then as mentioned here, that there are certain reformatory, what is the word Prabhupada uses here, formal reformatory performances, different types of, in the Varna and the ashram system, the different samskaras, purificatory ceremony or reformatory rituals to purify ourselves. And reformatory can mean just to improve, or can also mean because you've done something that's not very good, you have to reform yourself also. So of course we've done many things over many lives, and now in this life we have to purify ourselves. And ultimately anyone who takes birth in the material world, generally speaking, their condition is because of their karma, and they need to perform reformatory rituals to purify themselves so they advance spiritually. You have to take care of your material life, but you also have to think very carefully. So I was talking about before, the Svadharma and the Sanatana Dharma, the two tracks. So while living in the world, you follow your occupation, your ashram and everything, Varna and ashram, but at the same time you're practicing your eternal activity, your spiritual activity. And of course, ultimately it is the spiritual activity which will stand, which is eternal, and the Svadharma will, which is temporary, will go off. So that the goal is to be just situated on that Sanatana Dharma. So just taking birth, one needs to follow certain procedures. But here we see that Sukadeva Goswami, because he was avadut, this word is used, avadut is, here is translated as neglected by others, and because actually he was disinterested in everything. He didn't dress, there was no symptoms of any social status. In other words, what occupation was he? A Sudra? Was he they couldn't detect. He was just like a madman. He was not part of anything. Just wandering around. Ashram, what ashram is he? He was naked, so no one could. So therefore, they just those who, the kids and some ladies were following him. Just this man's a madman. But so he because he was so in Atmarama, self-satisfied in spiritual life, he just was like oblivious external things. So this is not an artificial position for someone who is actually truly advanced. It's just because they're so self-satisfied within themselves, externally they're just not interested, or they're oblivious to that. They just wander around, and whatever anyone says, they were making cutting remarks. Some of the children, some of it's mentioned in other places, that some of the children were throwing stones at him. He just wasn't affected. You can, calling names. He wasn't identifying with any of that. We identify, like we think we're very beautiful or very handsome. We identify, and then someone says, you're really ugly. What do you mean? Because we identify in a certain way. And so we take offense. We feel insulted, and we get affected. But because Sukadeva Goswami wasn't identifying in that, he was totally immersed in himself in spiritual realization. He didn't identify, whatever anyone said, it was inconsequential. So he was Atmaram. He was situated on the topmost levels. Now, interestingly enough, there are many accounts, I've mentioned this before, in regard to Sukadeva Goswami, such a wonderful personality. In a conversation between Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur and one scholar from Assam, he was asked about the position of Sukadeva Goswami, and Srila Bhaktisiddhanta says it appears from the Puranas there were two accounts of the appearance and activities of Sukadeva Goswami, and this is explained because of the different times he came in the different kalpas. In one kalpa he came in a certain way, and in another kalpa he came in another way. And he mentioned, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta appears on one description that he appeared from the Aruni wood. Now it is said that from the Mahabharata and from the Skanda Purana and Brahma Vivata Purana, there's a description of how Vyasadeva had practiced austerities for 100 years and meditated on Lord Shiva, and Lord Shiva blessed him with a son. He meditated to attain a son, and he blessed him with a son. He said, this son will be self-realized, but he will be Brahman realized, and he will appear as your son. So there's one description, and it is said that he appeared. Now it may be Srila Bhaktisiddhanta mentions two in the Puranas, but there was another description that he appeared from the churning of the Arani wood, and when Vyasadeva churned the wood, all of a sudden Sukadeva Goswami came in a very mystical way. Another description is that he placed his seed in his wife, what was his name, Vatika Devi, and he was born in that way. And then there's another description also given in the Mahabharata, and also given a little bit by Kavi Kanapurna in his Ananda Vrindavan Champu, in that formerly Sukadeva was the parrot of Srimati Radharani. And she was very affectionate to her parrot, and she would have the parrot on her hand, on her left hand, and she would be feeding the parrot pomegranate seeds. There's one description like this, that she'd be feeding the parrot pomegranate seeds and telling the parrot, just chant Krishna, Krishna, just chant Krishna, Krishna, like that. And so the parrot would chant Krishna, Krishna, very sweetly also. And then she taught the parrot how to chant not only Krishna, but the parrot started to speak, and she used to give the parrot messages to send to take to Krishna. So then the parrot would fly to where Krishna was, and then Krishna would be with his associate. There's one story, he's with Madhu Mangala one time, there was a parrot there in the tree, and the parrot said, Krishna, Krishna, Krishna. And then he took the parrot, and he's petting the parrot, and the parrot's like that. And then the parrot, also another time the parrot came and he passed a message from Radha to Krishna, and then Krishna would send the parrot back with a message from him to her. So there's all sorts of descriptions like that. This is one, as I said, by Kavi Shivananda Sen's son, who Kavi Kanapurna, he was the one that compiled the Gauradesha Dipika. So there's some description like that. Now, when Radha and Krishna, that story continues on. When Radha and Krishna were concluding their pastimes, Radharani, and there's different versions of this. Some say that Krishna told the parrot to stay behind, and some others say that the Radha told the parrot to stay behind, and because there was a purpose for staying behind, that he would be the speaker of their pastimes in the future. So the parrot was very unhappy. He didn't want to stay. He didn't want to be not in their association. But I think then he went to Krishna, assured him, and Radharani assured him also, that wherever our pastimes are recited, you will feel our presence. And so the parrot was flying around, and had found out that it was flying near the Kailash, where Lord Shiva was speaking the pastimes of Radha and Krishna, the Bhagavatam in other words, to Parvati. So the parrot perched in a tree and was listening. And Parvati was listening, but on occasion she dropped off and fell asleep. And then at one time she just fell asleep totally. But Lord Shiva was reciting with his eyes closed like that. So the parrot, not wanting, because previously Pravati was going, very good, very interesting. But then there was silence. So the parrot was worried that if Lord Shiva didn't hear that, then he would stop and stop reciting. So the parrot continued, very good, like that, mimicking his wife's voice. So then after a while, Lord Shiva opened his eyes and then he saw his wife was asleep. Said, well, who's been responding? So he looked up at the tree and he could deduce that there was this parrot. So here the pastimes of Radha Krishna, just a silly parrot, he's just mimicking, So he's not qualified. So he became a bit angry with the parrot that he had tricked him in this way. So he started running after the parrot and the parrot flew off. And it is said that parrot went over to the ashram of Vyasadeva, where he was speaking to his wife, Vyatika, about Radha Krishna pastimes. And at one point she yawned, that the story is she yawned, and by his mystic power, that parrot, fleeing Lord Shiva, went inside her mouth, into her womb. By his mystic power, he went small, and then went inside her womb, and he later appeared as Sukadeva Goswami. So that was that version. Different kalpas. Now, of course, Prabhupada says, he tells about Sukadeva Goswami, and earlier in this particular canto also, that he was travelling around, and it is said that he was. This seems to relate more to that Lord Shiva giving the blessing that he would have a son that was Brahman realized. And so for many years, now Prabhupada says 12 years he stayed in the womb and didn't want to come out. Others say 16 years. But anyway, Prabhupada says 12 years. So then Vyasadeva was concerned, and then he said, my son, why aren't you coming out from the womb? And said, I don't want to be affected by the Maya, the illusory energy. And so the Vyasadeva tried to convince him, he still wouldn't be convinced. And so then it is mentioned that Vyasadeva went to Dwarka and asked Krishna to come and convince him and assure him that he wouldn't be affected by Maya. So Krishna came there and assured the boy, and the boy came out. But as soon as he appeared, he just walked off, and the father ran after him. And there's some mention, Prabhupada does mention that he created a replica of him, which went back with Vyasadeva. There's another story where his father was concerned. He knew he was a self-realized soul, but he was concerned that he hears all this, all the shastras and everything like that, because then he could teach others. So he sent some disciples, after Sukadeva Goswami. And he gave them a couple of verses from the Bhagavatam to recite, to entice him to come back to hear more. And the couple of verses, they're actually mentioned. There are two verses from the Bhagavatam, one about how Krishna and the Putana Asura Rasa, rather Leela, and then another one was about Krishna's pastimes of Radharani. And so these two verses were recited to Sukadeva, so he was very interested to hear those verses, and the disciples got, with using that, they got him to come back. And then he heard, now Prabhupada mentions that Sukadeva Goswami heard not only the Bhagavatam, but Vyasadeva taught him all the Shastras. And in one place Prabhupada mentions, first of all he taught him the Mahabharata, and then he taught him the Srimad Bhagavatam. But then other places he taught him all the Shastras, all the Vedas, all the Shastras of that he was. So Sukadeva became very, very learned. Now in another place, In the Bhagavatam also, it's mentioned that not only he heard from his father, but he heard from Narad Muni, Srimad Bhagavatam. He heard from Devala Rishi, Srimad Bhagavatam. And another version that he went to Janaka Maharaj in another time and learned from him about the different aspects of spiritual advancement. So there's many, and Prabhupada mentions how he went to the even by his mystic power, he was able to go to the sun globe. So there's a lot of stories of Sukadeva Goswami. He appeared when Krishna and when Yudhisthira went to take instruction from the dying Bhishma on the battlefield. Many went there, and Sukadeva has mentioned that Sukadeva Goswami was one of them who went to and accompanied everybody else and went along with everybody else to hear Bhishma Dev's instructions to Yudhisthira Maharaj, and Sukadeva Goswami was there. So it's very, very famous, one of the great authorities of the universe. Mahajan. What is that verse? Swayambhu Narada Sambhu Kumara Kapilo Manu Pralado Janako Bhishmo Bali Vai Shiki Vayam. These great these authorities, Swayambhu, Narada, Sambhu. Who is the Swayambhu? Brahma, Swayambhu, Narada, Narad Muni, Sambhu, Lord Shiva. Swayambhu, Narada, Sambhu. Kumara, what is it? Swayambhu, Narada, Sambhu, Kumara, Kapilo, Manu, Lord Kapila, Manu, Narada, Sambhu, Kapilo, and Bali Maharaj. Vayashiki is Sukadeva. Vayam, of course, is Yamaraj speaking that verse, and Yamaraj. So he is accepted as one of the great Mahajans. So as far as purificatory procedures, he was an Avadut. He was self-realized. He had already, he didn't adopt any formal procedure, even as far as initiation. Born in the Brahmin family from his father, of course, and he didn't undergo Upanayanam even. He didn't have a thread. He didn't formally accept a guru with initiation, although Prabhupada mentions here that Vyasadeva was his natural guru, being his father and also instructor. And as I mentioned, it appears that he received instruction from many others as well. He spoke Mahabharata to Gandharvas. There's stories like that in the Mahabharata, that he spoke to the Gandharvas. He spoke to, before this incident, he spoke. So he didn't take initiation. He was already, now all these purificatory procedures are there for those who are very on the conditional level, and we follow certain processes to become more advanced. So it's for these types. It's for most of us. We have to follow these things because we're not naturally like that. We're not spontaneous in our spiritual absorption. We are distracted very easily. We think of other things. We're not fully immersed. So to help us, there is different things that we can do to become like that. But it wasn't necessary for Sukadeva Goswami. He was already like that. Although it is said that generally even those who are like that, who don't need to follow it, they follow these things to set examples. But as far as Sukadeva Goswami, he was less like Avadut. He wasn't even worried about that type of thing. He was not dependent on any formal process. The formal process is necessary for those who expected to reach the stage of complete liberation. But Sukadeva was already in that status by the grace of his father. He wasn't even properly dressed, so on and so forth. So very amazing, a powerful personality. So the different kalpas he appeared. One, he was Brahman realized. Next, he was the parrot. It would seem that if he was the parrot, he would know all the Bhagavatam already. He heard from Lord Shiva. and so on and so forth. So very amazing. The ultimate aim of life is to attain the highest perfectional stage of devotional service. So now Sukadeva Goswami had arrived there, and he was going to speak to Maharaj Parikshit. He attained. He became even more advanced by speaking the Bhagavatam, and of course he attained he is famous as attaining perfection for speaking the Bhagavatam, and Maharaj Parikshit is famous for reaching perfection for hearing the Srimad Bhagavatam. So there's all different stages. One can just keep advancing. It is not that one reaches a stage of spiritual saturation that you've reached the top, you cannot advance. Even the topmost devotee, keep advancing. Krishna himself says that I expand, my energies are expanding unlimitedly, and my knowledge potency, my chit potency, is also expanding to know all those things. So even Krishna is expanding. There's no saturation point in the higher understanding of spiritual life. So even one is very, very advanced still. I remember a comment by Prabhupada where he said that, do you not think that after preaching from Srimad Bhagavatam and Bhagavad Gita all these years in so many places around there, that I have become more advanced because of this? Even though Prabhupada was already very, very advanced, he considered he'd become more advanced by speaking these things. So it's very, very important. The speakers, the hearers, and especially speaking, one has to have good realization. Of course, hearing, all important. So to be able to speak nicely. In fact, actually, it is said that that before one speaks, one should hear very, very nicely. I always remember when Prabhupada told us that all that Sankirtan devotees went in to see Prabhupada one time, and it was presented that Madhavi said, these are the Sankirtan devotees, Prabhupada, they're distributing and selling your books everywhere. He says, oh, this is very, very good, but are you reading my books? He said, are you all reading my books? You have to read my books very, very carefully and understand all these subject matters. So to be able to speak nicely, we have to read and hear very nicely, and then advancement. So then you speak nicely, then you can hear nicely, then when you hear more nicely, you can speak more nicely, and so on and so forth. One becomes more and more advanced. So Sukadeva Goswami certainly became even more perfect. And so he also is mentioned, of course this will come up in the next verse, that he was very, very beautiful and so on and so forth, and very effulgent, and such a very, very, the great, and here he's referred to as Bhagavan. Generally this title is reserved for the Supreme Personality of Godhead, but sometimes we see it used for very, very powerful personalities. Prabhupada says just like Narad Muni sometimes is known as Bhagavan Narad, here the Bhagavan Sukadeva Goswami. So very, very wonderful personality. Hare Krishna. Has anyone got any question or comment?
Yes, in the previous verses, it said that Sukadeva Goswami came out of the room of his mother, right? And he went walking and the father following him. But now here it says that he traveled all over the earth. So I'm just wondering.
His father what?
His father, Vyasadeva, was following him when he came out of the womb of his mother, right? But then here in this verse, it says that he traveled. Before getting there, he traveled all over the earth. So I'm just wondering if that is the past time in another kalpa or the same.
In this verse he said he traveled all over. You mean Prabhupada says it? Or it's in the verses? What's that? Oh yeah. At that moment there appeared the powerful son of Vyasadeva who traveled over the earth, who traveled over the distance to satisfy in himself. But what does it mean? It means forward tense, doesn't it?
Well, when he came out of the womb, then his father followed him, but then he came out later on.
Yeah.
And he walked away. And then he came back and he heard the Bhagavatam.
Right.
Then again, it looked like he walked away.
And then he traveled.
All over the place.
Then he traveled.
So
meeting with Parikshit Maharaj.
Many years later.
Oh, no. What's that?
Big times ago.
Yeah.
Because he was president of Grandfather Vishnu, this is Maharaj Pariksit.
Oh, yeah, Sukadeva Goswami, yeah. He was living for a long time before he spoke to Maharaj Pariksit.
Okay. So it's not that.
That's like I said, he was there when Yudhisthira went to Bhishma Dev, but that was a long time before Pariksit, speaking to Lord Pariksit Maharaj. So yeah, so he appeared, and then all these other things happened. He came back, he heard, and then he went travelling again all over. Like that.
Thank you.
Yes.
It also seems like from that description that Vyasadeva didn't follow him for very long because it explained that he's called out to him, but nothing like only the trees heard him or something like that. So he just like walked after him for a little while and then was calling for him, and then he didn't follow him much longer after that. That's what the description is.
Right. Then he sent his disciples. What's that?
So there's another Sukadeva that's got married, I think. That's described in 910, I think. There's one Sukadeva appears there and got married and so on and stuff. But I think Vishwanath Thakur says it's a different Sukadeva. It wasn't that Sukadeva.
Yeah, right, exactly, yeah. Jai Srila Prabhupada ki jai, Gopanandi Hari Hari Bol.